Everfree Guardian, Chapter 4. 2 weeks. That's how long it's been since Fluttershy, Applejack, or any pony had seen or heard from the local human living in a seclusion within the Everfree forest. Gilda, when she was found, was admitted into Ponyville Hospital, treated for her injuries, and now through several pointed surgeries just to get her jaw back on straight. In the various times that she was seen by those visiting her, she was more and more of a mess every time. Fluttershy herself had braced the wilderness of the Everfree in an effort to catch up to Nate after the incidents. His trail was able to be tracked via the blood left in his wake. Whether his or Gilda's, he practically oozed it, and it covered his tracks in the literal sense. However, when she reached the ends, there was nothing. A small open clearing that resulted in a dead end. Fluttershy couldn't understand it, nor could she pick up another trail to follow Nate. Thus, she had no choice but to return home, sulking day in and day out as she no longer saw her friend come out of that forest in the mornings. Applejack wasn't faring much better. With how things went and the certain hints and clues that illuminated what happened, the farm mare was livid with a lot of ponies. Her ire was mainly focused on Gilda. She may not have known Nate for that long, but she knew him enough to know that he wouldn't just up and attack someone for no reason. The fiasco with the Timberwolves proved this. Nate was a fighter, but wasn't one to actively search for trouble. And it just so happens that trouble seems to find him. Now, because of all of this, the Apple family had temporarily lost their newest and most recently treasured employee, and the family morale had fallen quite a bit. It didn't help the fact that the Royal Guard was involved as well. Several medical units led by one of Twilight's older siblings, Gleaming Shield, were called out by the Purple Unicorn to help in nursing Gilda back to health. Details on what happened to her were scarce at best, as no pony had the full picture, though Gleaming was just as sharp as Applejack when picking up on the more subtle details of a story. It wasn't long before they came and went, leaving the case as incomplete but closed until further notice. With that being said, everything slowly returned to business as usual, aside from the behavioral changes due to Nate's absence. Speaking of which...
Listen up, every pony!
The residents of Ponyville turned from their respective tasks as Twilight Sparkle stood atop a small bridge that separated a park from Ponyville's main village. Fluttershy, who was among the crowd, looked up at the Purple Unicorn as she was ripped away from her sulking.
Smoke is spreading all over Equestria, but don't worry. I've just received a letter from Princess Celestia informing me that's not coming from a fire.
Some of the natives sighed in relief after that initial panic when seeing the said streams of dark clouds in the sky above them. Their relief quickly shifted back when Twilight clarified what it was really coming from.
It's coming from an adult dragon who leads a small group of adolescents, and their collective presence is swarming the nation with these smoke clouds.
Every pony shared their concerns with one another as Twilight's friends began to arrive one by one. Applejack, hearing Twilight's claim before the others, tilted her head as she narrowed her eyes in concern.
What in the name of Cinnamon's World is a full-grown dragon doing in Equestria, let alone bringing younglings with them?
Twilight shook her head.
I can't say what the younger dragons are doing, but the adults is here to just sleep.
At that, confusion spread throughout the crowd, making Twilight clear the air once more.
According to the princess, he's taking a nap while the young that follow him do their own thing. His snoring combined with the teenagers' rambunctious antics in the neighboring towns is what's causing the smoke.
Rarity stepped up to Applejack, the two sharing a glance and greeting before the former spoke up.
Darling, what do you mean by rambunctious? They're raiding nearby villages and towns, asserting their greed and taking what they want while letting the rest burn. This is why the princess believes this to be a matter of importance. If this continues, it would cause some friction between Equestria and the Dragonlands.
Applejack crossed her arms.
Well, at least that big fella ain't causing no harm. But what does the princess want us to do about it? I'll tell you what we're meant to do.
Rainbow flew overhead, hovering above the crowd and looking down at her friends.
Give him and the scrawny bastards that follow him the boot.
Twilight frowned at the Pegasus speedster.
No, Rainbow Dash, violence isn't gonna solve this. While it may be necessary to subdue the teenagers, we need to only encourage the adults to take his nap elsewhere. Princess Celestia has given the Elements of Harmony this specific mission for a reason, and we cannot fail. If we do, the kingdom is involved with a prelude to another great war with the dragons.
Rainbow Dash pouted at her chances being stolen from her, but kept quiet. She may be brash, but she's not stupid. Doing things her way will bring more harm than good to the kingdom.
Alright, fine. I'll head up to Cloudsdale and get some supplies for the trip. I'll also see if we can get the weather factory to lend some clouds, just in case we need a bit of lightning to spook the younger dragons.
Applejack tipped her hat forward as she walked backwards to her farm.
I'll whip up some grub for us to take as well. No sense in going on empty stomachs.
One by one, the 6 mares headed in separate directions, all preparing for the trip ahead of them. Fluttershy, on the other hand, stayed in the park, looking towards the mountains where the smoke was coming from. An adult dragon was there, sleeping the years away while his young were terrorizing the nation. That alone scared her, but what frightened her more was where the mountain was located. The Everfree Forest. A cavern tunnel lit up in a series of flashes as Nate fired 2 shots down one side, the bullets piercing the scales of another dragon and throwing him onto his back. With another of these lizards dead, Nate turned and hauled himself down the tunnel, escaping into an adjacent path with several more of these creatures tailing after him. Grimacing at his luck and cursing the dragon's sharp senses, Nate slid down the steep slope into another tunnel's path, which broke up into 2 roads. Nate's home was compromised. The tunnel system that he knew from front to back was exposed, and the dragons were pouring in. How the hell did they even find him? He camouflaged his home perfectly. Wooden boards covered in foliage and leaves disguised every entrance and exit to the system, which all led back to the central hub where he built his house. He had to have made a mistake somewhere, that was the only explanation. Sliding down another steep decline, the still healing human landed in the center chamber of the system, a hub that was connected to all of the tunnels. The room itself was vast, and it was illuminated by a glowing lake. In the center of the lake was an island, one that Nate built his home upon with a bridge separating the mainland and the island. Standing up, Nate reloaded his Smith & Wesson as he made his way towards his house. Stopping just after taking a few steps, he looked up, as a group of those dragons came dropping from another tunnel, landing between him and his house. Stopping just after taking a few steps, he looked up, as a group of those dragons came dropping from another tunnel, landing between him and his house. Readying his pistol, the human took a step back as the group advanced on him. Killing 2 instantly with a pull of the trigger, Nate grunted as one of them latched onto his side. Shoving the draconic being off, he popped several cartridges into his chest, as he aimed up and pumped the rest of his clip into the remaining foes in his path. Moving to continue to his house, he heard the caves crack and break. Looking back as he got to the bridge, he found one of the dragons, a bigger and nastier one, slamming its head through the cave wall. Judging by the size of the head, this one's at least the size of a house. More of the body shook the system, revealing its front as the silver scales of the beast shone within the beams of light coming from the tunnels above. For a brief moment, Nate covered his ears when the roar echoed throughout the chamber. With it, several more smaller dragons were called to engage the human in this fight. Reloading and firing at the beasts, he managed to kill one of them, before 2 the size of a beagle dog clasped onto his head. Struggling to stand, let alone walk properly, he reeled his arms up, and swiped them into the dirt with a swing downwards past his face. Their claws tore away some of his hood and scratched up his face, adding to the large gash that crossed his eye thanks to the fight that he had with a griffin a few weeks prior to now. The human was still injured from that fight, having suffered some pretty gruesome wounds that he had to patch himself up from. Certainly wasn't easy, especially since he had to stitch himself up with an old sewing needle and bits of string. He thanked his lucky stars that the needle didn't give him tetanus, or the cuts and scrapes weren't infected. His biggest concerns were the one on his back, but after hours of trying, he managed to close it and bandage himself up. The rest of his days were spent relaxing and letting his body rest. His home was a one-room concept, and he spent most of the time on some iteration of the PlayStation 4 powered by magic. He had a lot of fun, and even friended this one gamer named Gamer Luna who was actually really good at a lot of these games. But digressing, Nate stood firm, as he fired away at the rest coming up to him, ripping off those who grabbed him and curb-stomping those that he put into the ground. Looking back up at the larger dragon, he was too slow to avoid the large claw coming at him. Gripped in its enlarged hold, the dragon roared in his face, before smashing him against the ground. Gagging blood as it lifted him back up, the floor broke away, revealing the source of the glowing light underneath the lake.
Is that a port?
Alright girls, listen up. I'm mapping out the safest yet fastest route to the Dragon's Cave.
Twilight stood before the Everfree forest. All of them agreed that going through the forest from Ponyville directly was a bad idea, so they rounded it to find the shortest route to the base of the mountain. Now standing at the edge of the forest itself, they were prepared and ready to go inside, though one cream-coated mare had second thoughts due to the danger that they'd face inside.
The Dragon's Cave is located at the top of the mountain itself, just a little ways below the peak. According to the reports, the younglings occupy the lower levels, so we'll have a tough enough time getting through them to get to the adults.
Applejack nodded in agreement.
The other things that we gotta worry about are the hot and weather. Judging by how hot it is, we'll be freezing our rear ends off once we get 3/4 of the way up.
Rarity smiled as she reached into her satchel.
Good thing I brought a scarf for everyone.
She pulled them all out at once, throwing them into the air and using her magic to wrap them around the others. Rainbow Dash rolled her eyes at Rarity while Fluttershy peered up at the mountain, shaking like a leaf as her shy demeanor also came with natural fears. Heights wasn't one of them, but dragons surely were. Looking into Twilight as she was examining a map, she licked her lips as she tugged on her sleeve.
Twilight? Maybe I should just, sit this one out. You know, stay back in Ponyville.
Twilight gave a low hum, absent-mindedly acknowledging Fluttershy without paying attention. This caused Fluttershy to beam, thinking that she could get out of this.
Oh, that's perfect then. I'll stay back in Ponyville and...
Twilight's ear flicked as her mind came back to reality. Perking up at Fluttershy's claim, she shook her head.
Wait, what? You can't stay, Fluttershy. We'll need you. Your way with wild animals will surely come in handy. But I don't think I...
Twilight smiled as she rolled up her map, giving her shy friend a kind and gentle look as she deposited the map away in her bag.
You don't have to worry about a thing, Fluttershy. Your animals are being well cared for. I've got Spike helping a caretaker back at your cottage. Everything is in good hands. I know, I can count on Spike. It's just that...
Fluttershy looked back at the mountain as she heard the familiar crackles of a certain weapon. Applejack, hearing this as well, turned her eyes up to the mountain, seeing that more of the cracks came as well as small flashes near midway up the mountain. They both knew what this meant. Nate was up there. With his presence and desire to see him again fueling a newfound encouragement, Fluttershy silenced all semblances of protest. Shying away behind her mane, she twiddled her fingers as Rainbow Dash took a side glance at her. Hovering over to Twilight, she leaned down to whisper to her.
Are you sure you want Fluttershy to come along? We are talking about a pony who's afraid of her own shadow.
Twilight looked over to Fluttershy as she was standing next to Applejack, the two having a conversation of their own. Twilight was surprised to see the Pegasus not backing down from going on this trip. Sure, she suggested staying in hopes that she wouldn't have to deal with any dragons, but that all changed suddenly when they heard magic being used by the scaly creatures with the carious tunnel systems halfway up the main tower of the mountain. Seeing her resolve, she shook her head at Rainbow.
I'm sure she's fine. She's just a bit nervous, that's all. Once we get going, she'll pick up the pace with us.
Rainbow Dash eyed Fluttershy, seeing the same thing Twilight did. She wasn't as convinced that her old pal was up for this trip. Fluttershy was never brave, not like she was. And she didn't go on extreme adventures or stood up to bullies in their younger days. Rainbow had protected her, gave her strength. She'd hoped that strength would come to fruition as time passed, and to an extent, it did. It was just entirely situational with this girl. Nevertheless, if Fluttershy wasn't backing out, then Rainbow wasn't going to say anything. Flying off ahead to scout any danger in their path, the other girls began their steady trek into the Everfree forest. As they moved down the path towards the mountain, Fluttershy looks back up at the mountain, hearing the same distant commotion as before. Biting her lip, she silently prayed that her alien friend was alright. After all the beatings that he'd taken so far, I'm pretty sure he's fine. In a way, he's similar to Geralt, taking a bunch of beatings but still living, just with a lot of scars on his body, but also he's using guns. So it's kind of like him, sort of. Anyways, let's get on to our extremely tough donators. Top donators: Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, Darkside, Gauntlet, and only one thing. Zar630, Rayden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Pastel Skies, Austin Roland, Crazy Killer 557, Stu Hex, Will, Omicron Lyre, Chris, Dalspell, Delta Omega, Jack Cadge, RuneScythe 9852, Madman Stan, Leslie Perkett, Drake Lovedragon, Hansa Norman, Stephen Bingham, LineGod12, Sorcerer Constantine, Hud Zaza, Grimwolf, and many more super kind people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.